The internet didn't just buzz, it exploded. Because when Vincent Herbert's name re-entered the conversation, it didn't come with nostalgia or reconciliation. It came with accusations, so heavy that fans immediately felt the floor drop out beneath everything they thought they knew about the Braxton family's behind-the-scenes story. Tamar Braxton. Money. Control. And a claim so incendiary it spread faster than anyone could stop it. She looted all my money. Now pause, because this wasn't whispered in a comment section. This was framed as a reckoning. Years of silence. Years of side-eye. Years of rumors that never quite connected, suddenly snapped into place with one explosive allegation. Vincent didn't ease into it. He didn't hedge. He allegedly painted a picture of betrayal, so deep that fans immediately asked the same question at the same time. Was this what really destroyed everything? Timelines lit up as people scrambled to rewind history. The lavish era. The sudden financial shifts. The way narratives changed after the marriage imploded. People started replaying old interviews with brand new ears, noticing pauses they ignored before, comments that suddenly felt loaded. And once the word money entered the chat, real money, not rumors, the tone shifted from gossip to warfare. Because accusations about finances aren't just personal. They are legal. They are reputational. And they suggest a power struggle that was never meant to be public. Especially when a family as protective, polished, and powerful as the Braxtons is involved. No receipts released. No court documents shown. Just a man claiming he was drained, silenced, and pushed aside while everyone watched the story play out a very different way on TV. And the most chilling part. Nobody rushed to shut it down.
The Braxtons. They need to be on TV.
Yep.
And you said, the Braxtons. They need to be on TV.
Yep.
And at this point, Toni Braxton is very reserved. She she's Toni Braxton.
Yeah.
And this isn't the time where a Toni Braxton goes and does a reality television show.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you gonna get Toni Braxton to do?
Took me about 7 months to convince her.
And you were like, Jay, it's gonna be great. It's gonna be great.
7 months to convince her. Because television at that time to me is like the reality world. Tamar woke up one day and was like, yo, we should do a reality show on my family. That's how that happened. And I went and like everything, I'm not gonna lose. I'm gonna go make it happen. And Toni was like, I don't know if we should do it, And plus that's so.
Because if this is even partially true, this isn't a messy breakup story. It's a financial fallout that's been buried for years, and just cracked open. The moment Vincent Herbert's words started circulating, the temperature around the Braxton narrative changed instantly, not because anyone had seen paperwork, but because of what was being alleged and who was saying it. Vincent wasn't framed as a distant commentator, or a random voice chasing relevance. He was framed as someone who lived inside the story for years, someone who shared finances, business decisions, and private struggles with Tamar Braxton while cameras captured only fragments of their reality. And when someone with that level of proximity alleges financial betrayal, people stop scrolling and start listening, even when nothing has been proven.
Did it, and it changed everybody's life.
Yeah.
Like they all have got this. It's the longest running African American show
Now, what they did with the money to the family.
in the history of television.
No. Are you serious?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
Congratulations.
Go Braxton.
Yes.
Go Braxton.
I spent $1.2 million of my own money to make that.
It's critical to say this clearly from the start. These are allegations, not verified facts. No court filings have been publicly presented. No bank records released. No judgments rendered. What exists right now is a claim, a serious one, that immediately reframed how fans revisited Tamar and Vincent's past. And in celebrity culture, reframing can be just as powerful as evidence, especially when silence follows. The phrase attributed to Vincent, that Tamar looted his money, landed hard because of its implication. It wasn't framed as a disagreement over finances or a messy divorce settlement. It was framed as depletion, as control, as someone walking away with resources while the other was left financially damaged. Language like that carries weight, and once it's out there, people begin reconstructing history around it. Almost immediately, fans started rewinding the timeline. The peak years of their marriage. The period when Vincent was a dominant music executive. The sudden shift when his public presence diminished. The financial rumors that quietly followed him for years. None of those moments were new, but with this allegation, they were being reinterpreted through a different lens.
So you shot it
I paid for it.
and paid for it.
Not as coincidence or bad luck, but as consequence. What made this moment especially volatile was how little resistance it initially encountered. There was no immediate public rebuttal. No statement dismissing the claim as false. No clarification about context or intent. That absence didn't confirm anything, but it created space. And in that space, speculation rushed in fast. Supporters of Tamar were quick to point out that divorce finances are complex. That shared accounts, business entanglements, and legal settlements can look like loss to one party even when handled legally. They emphasized that allegations don't equal wrongdoing, and that language like looting can be emotionally charged rather than legally accurate. Those reminders mattered, but they didn't stop the conversation from spreading. On the other side, critics argued that Vincent had little incentive to make a claim this explosive without believing it deeply. They noted that financial allegations open doors to scrutiny, not sympathy. That making such a statement invites questions about receipts, records, and responsibility. And that if the claim were completely fabricated, it would be an enormous risk to take publicly. Again, not proof, but perception. What intensified this first phase was how neatly the allegation slid into long-standing whispers. For years, there had been quiet rumors about Vincent's financial downfall, about deals gone wrong, about money mismanagement. Those rumors were never confirmed, but they existed. And now, with this new claim, some people began asking whether they had misunderstood the origin of those struggles entirely. Whether what they assumed was business failure might, instead be fallout from personal betrayal. The Braxton family's reputation added another layer. They are known for unity, control of narrative, and fierce protection of their own. When someone accuses one member of causing harm, financial or otherwise, it doesn't just implicate an individual. It implicates a system, a family structure, a power dynamic that has historically closed ranks when challenged. That's why the phrase, Braxton family secrets, gained traction so fast. Not because secrets were proven, but because the family's tight control made the idea plausible to some. What also made this moment resonate was Vincent's past silence. For years, he rarely spoke publicly in detail about the breakdown of the marriage. That restraint had been interpreted in multiple ways: dignity, shame, exhaustion, or agreement with the narrative that painted him as the architect of his own downfall. This allegation, if nothing else, challenged that assumption. It suggested that his silence may not have been acceptance, but endurance. Still, it's important to recognize the limits of what the public knows. Divorce settlements are often confidential. Financial arrangements are rarely simple. And accusations made outside of court lack the structure that evidence provides. At this stage, there is no documentation confirming financial theft, misappropriation, or wrongdoing. There is only a claim and the reaction to it. What this first phase truly revealed was not truth, but fragility of narrative. How quickly a long-held story can wobble when someone introduces an alternative explanation. How fans, once comfortable with a clean villain-hero dynamic, suddenly find themselves unsure of who held power, and how it was used. As this chapter closed, the internet wasn't aligned on belief. It was aligned on curiosity. People weren't concluding, they were questioning, re-watching, reconsidering. And that shift alone was enough to destabilize years of accepted storyline. This section doesn't end with proof or refutation. It ends with tension, the kind that comes from realizing you may not have seen the full picture, but also knowing that allegations without evidence are not answers. What comes next will matter not because of how dramatic it is, but because of whether anything concrete emerges to support or dismantle what has been claimed. For now, all that exists is an accusation hanging in the air, heavy, unproven, and powerful enough to reopen a story many thought was already finished. As the story moved into its second phase, the conversation stopped being about shock and started being about structure. Not what Vincent said, but how something like this could even be true, misunderstood, or strategically framed. Because once the initial disbelief settled, people began asking harder questions. Not emotional ones. Practical ones. Financial ones.
Yes.
Before it was ever
Yes.
asked. Oh, wow.
Yes. You can't talk about stuff and don't do something and believe in it. You know,
Him and I know.
You can't just be like, oh, I got this idea. No, go execute it.
Go execute it.
Let's not talk about it, let's be about it.
Show and prove.
Exactly. Same thing with the talk show with The Real, with Tamar. We started that show at Tamar being a new young Wendy Williams. And then we sat down, we met with every production company and fell in love with Telepictures. And they were like, oh, we want to put the show on the internet. I said, well, she's already on 2 different televisions. I said, that's not going to work for me. So they were like, so what do you want to do? And then we said, well, let's make an ensemble. And then they were like, so Tamar, who do you want on the show? We was at the Beverly Hills Hotel, I'll never forget it. Tamar said Adrian Bailon and Tamara. And then Telepictures had deals with Lonnie and with Ginny. But that was Tamar's idea.
I still have a
With completely opposite interpretations of what happened financially, even when everything was handled within the law. That context didn't make Vincent's allegation disappear, but it reframed how some people understood it. Supporters of Tamar argued that what Vincent described as being looted could just as easily be the result of shared marital assets being redistributed during divorce, or financial decisions made jointly during the marriage that later felt one-sided in hindsight. Divorce doesn't always feel fair, even when it's legal. An emotional pain can turn complicated math into moral accusation very quickly. At the same time, critics pushed back hard on that framing. They pointed out that Vincent didn't use neutral language. He didn't say, we disagreed over money, or I lost assets in the divorce. The language attributed to him suggested intentional depletion, not confusion. And that distinction mattered to those who believed he was trying to correct a narrative that had painted him as financially irresponsible for years. This phase reignited debate about Vincent's public fall from industry power. For a long time, his financial struggles were framed as career decline, bad investments, or mismanagement. That explanation had gone largely unchallenged until now. With this allegation, some began questioning whether that storyline had been incomplete. Whether financial strain that appeared professional might have been deeply personal. Again, no proof, but the question itself destabilized old assumptions. The Braxton family's role became a focal point here, not because anyone had accused them directly, but because of how family systems work when money and fame are involved. The Braxtons are not just relatives, they are a brand, a business ecosystem, and a media presence with experience controlling narrative. That doesn't imply wrongdoing. But it does mean that when disputes arise, power dynamics matter. Who has the platform? Who has the audience? Who has the leverage? Silence from the family during this phase was interpreted in conflicting ways. Supporters saw it as maturity, refusing to dignify a claim that lacked evidence. Critics saw it as strategic restraint, allowing the claim to burn itself out without adding oxygen. Neither interpretation could be confirmed, but both highlighted how silence itself becomes part of the story when stakes are this high. Another element that surfaced in this phase was timing. Why now? Why after years of relative quiet? Some suggested Vincent was finally speaking, because he had nothing left to lose. Others argued that resurfacing old grievances in public often coincides with unresolved emotional or financial stress. Timing doesn't determine truth, but it always invites interpretation. Fans also began noticing how little concrete detail accompanied the allegation. No dates. No dollar amounts. No specific transactions. That absence led some to question whether this was a legal claim or an emotional one. Because legal accusations tend to be precise, while emotional ones are often broad. That distinction didn't invalidate Vincent's feelings, but it raised questions about the forum chosen to express them. Importantly, this phase also included voices urging caution against turning financial allegations into moral verdicts. Money disputes after divorce are among the most bitter and complicated conflicts people experience. They often involve competing perceptions of contribution, sacrifice, and entitlement. One person's taking is another's earning. Without documentation, the public cannot determine which perception aligns with reality. Still, the damage of the allegation itself continued to ripple. Tamar's image as a survivor, a provider, and a woman who rebuilt herself after hardship was now being challenged, not with proof, but with implication. An implication, once introduced, sticks. Even people who defended her found themselves qualifying statements with "if this were true," which shows how narratives shift simply by existing. This phase also exposed how gender expectations shape financial narratives. Women are often framed as dependents or beneficiaries, even when they earn, manage, or negotiate assets. The idea that Tamar could have controlled or redirected finances conflicted with some people's assumptions, which made the allegation feel shocking to some and implausible to others. That tension revealed how stereotypes influence belief more than evidence ever should. As the conversation deepened, a quieter question emerged: what would resolution even look like? If there are no public records, no lawsuits, no filings, then this story may never be conclusively answered. Financial disputes resolved privately rarely get revisited publicly with clarity. And that reality means the public may be left with uncertainty indefinitely. This second phase didn't bring confirmation or denial. It brought complexity. It forced people to sit with the uncomfortable truth that marriages, especially high-profile ones, can leave both parties feeling wronged, even when no crime occurred. And that public accusations, once made, don't require proof to alter perception. As this chapter closed, the conversation shifted again, away from shock and toward credibility. Not who was right, but who people believed. And belief, in the absence of evidence, says as much about the audience as it does about the allegation. What remained was a fractured narrative. Two people with shared history, competing stories, and no public mechanism to reconcile them. And that fracture, unresolved and exposed, became the real story moving forward. By the time this story reached its third phase, the noise wasn't coming from new claims. It was coming from what the allegation had already unsettled. Because once money enters a public narrative, especially between former spouses, it changes how everything before and after is interpreted. And in this case, the lack of proof didn't quiet the conversation. It complicated it. At this point, nothing concrete had emerged to substantiate Vincent Herbert's claim. No lawsuits filed publicly. No court judgments. No documents, audits, or records placed into evidence. And that absence mattered more than ever. Because as days passed without verification, the story stopped functioning as a revelation and started functioning as a stress test of credibility, memory, and public trust. One of the clearest shifts in this phase was how audiences began separating emotion from allegation. Many acknowledged that Vincent's pain could be real without his framing being legally accurate. Divorce can leave deep financial scars even when outcomes are lawful. People can feel drained without being robbed. They can feel exploited without exploitation occurring. And they can experience loss without someone else having committed wrongdoing. That distinction became central as the conversation matured. At the same time, others argued that dismissing the claim as mere emotion risked silencing a man who believed he was finally correcting the record. They pointed out that narratives around Vincent for years painted him as financially irresponsible, diminished, or washed, narratives he rarely contested. In that context, speaking up now could be interpreted not as attack, but as self-reclamation. Again, not proof, but motive matters when assessing credibility. What complicated everything further was the reality that the public may never see the full financial picture. High-profile divorces often involve confidential settlements, sealed agreements, and non-disclosure clauses. If such agreements exist, they would limit what either party could responsibly say, and explain why allegations might remain vague. But that same vagueness also weakens public claims, creating a stalemate that can't be resolved in the open. As this phase unfolded, more voices began pushing back against the rush to assign moral guilt. They emphasized that looting is a loaded word, one that implies criminal intent, and that without legal findings, using it as fact is irresponsible. Financial outcomes can feel unjust without being illegal. And the internet's tendency to turn personal grievances into verdicts often causes harm without delivering truth. Tamar's continued silence became a focal point here. Not because silence confirms guilt, it doesn't, but because it leaves space for interpretation. Supporters saw her restraint as wisdom, refusing to engage in a narrative built on unproven claims. The Braxton family's broader reputation also influenced how people processed this phase. They are known for unity, brand awareness, and controlled storytelling. That history led some to believe they would never air internal disputes publicly, regardless of validity. Others argued that such discipline doesn't equate to wrongdoing, only to experience managing fame. Again, perception filled gaps where facts did not exist. Importantly, this phase brought a quieter reckoning about what the audience expects from truth. Many realized they were unlikely to get closure. Financial disputes between ex-spouses rarely conclude in public with tidy explanations. If no legal action is taken, the public may never know whose interpretation aligns with reality, or whether reality sits somewhere between both accounts. That realization shifted the tone. Less outrage, more fatigue. People began recognizing that continuing to debate an unproven allegation risked cementing a narrative that might never be corrected. Even if later disproven, the association would linger. That's the cost of public accusation. Without public evidence, it creates residue that doesn't wash off easily. This phase also exposed a broader cultural issue: how easily money disputes are moralized. Financial outcomes are complex, shaped by contracts, labor, timing, and risk. Yet public discourse often reduces them to villains and victims. That reduction may feel satisfying, but it rarely reflects reality. And in this case, the lack of documentation made any definitive moral judgment premature. As the conversation slowed, one truth became clear: this story would not resolve itself online. If there is legitimacy to Vincent's claim, it would need to be addressed through legal channels, not interviews or headlines. And if there isn't, the public airing of it still carries consequences, reputational, emotional, and relational, that cannot be undone by silence or time alone. This third phase didn't end with vindication or condemnation. It ended with uncertainty, and the uncomfortable understanding that uncertainty is sometimes the only honest conclusion. Two people can walk away from the same marriage with different truths, shaped by pain, loss, and memory. The public, however, does not get to convert those truths into facts without evidence. What remains is a cautionary tale about narrative power. About how allegations, once spoken, reshape perception even in the absence of proof. And about the responsibility that comes with telling a story that implicates real people in serious claims. In the end, this chapter closes not on who was right or wrong, but on what was revealed about the limits of public knowledge. Some stories cannot be resolved by commentary. Some truths are sealed by law, time, or mutual silence. And some accusations, once released, live on regardless of outcome. The only responsible takeaway here is restraint. Acknowledging the claim without endorsing it, recognizing the pain without assigning guilt, and remembering that without evidence, certainty is not clarity, it's assumption. Before you click away, stop for a second, because this is exactly how stories like this either turn into reckless rumor, or become a moment where people actually think critically. What you just heard wasn't a verdict. It wasn't proof. It was a reminder of how powerful an allegation can be even when evidence never follows, and how fast public perception can shift once money, marriage, and silence collide. If you stayed through this, it means you understand something important. Not every explosive claim deserves blind belief, and not every quiet response means guilt. Some stories live in the gray because the truth is private, protected, or legally sealed. And pretending otherwise only creates damage that can't be undone. So if you value conversations that slow things down instead of speeding misinformation up, make that clear. Like this video so measured breakdowns don't get buried under sensational clips. Drop a comment with your perspective, not to pick sides, but to talk about credibility, evidence, and why financial accusations are never as simple as headlines make them sound. And subscribe, because if anything factual ever does emerge, context will matter more than shock. This isn't about drama. It's about discernment. And staying engaged thoughtfully is how you make sure the loudest voices aren't always the least responsible ones.